The smoke filled her lungs as she stood at the cave entrance, watching the man who had murdered her husband writhe in the flames she had set. Aiyana's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what she had done. The screams echoing from within the cave weren't human anymore. They were the sounds of a monster finally meeting justice. She had trapped him perfectly, just as he had trapped her in this nightmare. The burning wood she'd thrown inside painted the rocky walls orange and red, like the sunset she and Tobias had watched just 3 days ago, before everything changed. Her heart pounded as she remembered his gentle kiss on her forehead that morning, his promise to bring back fresh fish for dinner. Now Tobias lay at the bottom of Lake Delaware, and the man who put him there was burning alive by her hand. The cave had been their secret place once, hers and Tobias's. They'd discovered it during their first week of marriage, when life on Bramley's mountain felt like an endless adventure. Now she had turned their sanctuary into a tomb for a killer. Aiyana pressed her back against the cold stone, listening as Marcus, that was the murderer's name, though she hated to speak it, clawed at the rocks she had loosened to block his escape. She had planned this perfectly, leading him here like a fool, chasing what he could never have. The passages inside twisted like a snake, and she knew them all. He knew none. When he had followed her into the darkness, thinking her trapped, she had slipped through the hidden tunnel that led to fresh air. By the time he realized his mistake, she had already sealed his fate. The silence came suddenly. No more screams, no more scratching at stone, just the crackle of dying flames and the whisper of wind through pine trees. Aiyana's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the rocky ground, her deerskin dress pooling around her. Everything hurt, her heart most of all. 3 days ago, she had been a wife. Now she was a widow and a killer. The tears came then, hot and endless, streaming down her face as she gasped for air that tasted of smoke and revenge. She had done what needed doing, but it brought Tobias back no closer. The mountain felt empty without his laughter, without his strong arms carrying firewood, without his terrible jokes that made her smile even when she tried not to. A raven cawed overhead, breaking through her grief. Aiyana looked up at the blackbird circling against the gray morning sky. In her tribe stories, ravens carried messages between the living and the dead. "Tell him I avenged him," she whispered to the bird. "Tell Tobias that Marcus will never hurt anyone again." The raven cawed once more and flew toward the lake as if it understood. Aiyana stood slowly, her legs shaking like a newborn fawn's. She had one more thing to do, one final act in this terrible story. The path to Lake Delaware stretched before her, winding down the mountain through clusters of pine and oak. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she forced herself forward. She had made her choice the moment Marcus's knife found Tobias's heart. Behind her, smoke still rose from the cave, a black column reaching toward heaven. Let it burn, she thought. Let the whole mountain see what happens to men who destroy love out of jealousy. Her bare feet found the familiar stones of the path, worn smooth by generations of her people. This was the same trail she had run down 3 days ago, racing to the lake after hearing the sounds of battle. She had arrived just in time to see Marcus dump Tobias's body over the side of his canoe, just in time to see the satisfied smirk on his face as he looked up at her. That image burned in her mind, hotter than any flame. But now Marcus was dead, and she was walking toward her own ending, toward the only reunion with Tobias that remained possible. 6 months earlier, before death and fire, Before jealousy turned to murder, Aiyana had been gathering blackberries near the stream when she first saw Tobias. He wasn't from her tribe. His people lived closer to the valley, but he had come to trade furs for arrowheads. She watched him from behind a cluster of bushes, intrigued by how gently he handled the fox pelts, as if apologizing to their spirits for taking their warmth. His hair was long and black like a river at night, tied back with a strip of leather. When he laughed at something one of the elders said, the sound was rich and warm like honey. She didn't mean to stare, but something about him felt different from the other young men who strutted around the village like roosters. He moved with quiet confidence, speaking only when he had something worth saying. Their eyes met when she stepped on a twig, the crack echoing like thunder in her ears. Instead of looking away, Tobias smiled, not the hungry smile she was used to from men, but something softer, almost shy. He raised his hand in greeting, and she found herself walking toward him before her mind could stop her feet. "I'm Tobias," he said simply. "You have blackberry juice on your chin." She touched her face, mortified, but he pulled a clean cloth from his pouch and offered it to her. "I'm Aiyana," she managed to say, wiping her face. "Thank you." They stood there for a moment, neither knowing what to say next, until her father called her back to the village. As she walked away, she felt his eyes following her, but it didn't feel like Marcus's stare that always made her skin crawl. This felt like sunshine on her shoulders. Marcus had been watching too, from his usual spot in the shadows between lodges. He had decided years ago that Aiyana would be his wife, though she had never given him a single sign of interest. Where Tobias was warm river stones, Marcus was sharp flint. His face bore scars from too many fights, and his eyes held a coldness that made children hide behind their mothers. He had asked her father for permission to court her 3 times, and 3 times her father had said the choice was Aiyana's to make. Each rejection had made Marcus angrier, more desperate, more convinced that she simply needed to be shown that he was the strongest, the fiercest, the most deserving. He didn't understand that strength without kindness was just another form of weakness. Tobias returned every week after that first meeting, always with furs to trade, always finding reasons to linger near the stream where he'd first seen Aiyana. They talked about everything, the stories their grandmothers told, the best spots to find deer, the way clouds looked like running horses before a storm. He taught her words in his dialect, and she showed him how to find the sweetest berries. Their friendship grew like a garden, slow and steady, nourished by laughter and quiet understanding. Even her little brother, usually suspicious of strangers, took to following Tobias around like a shadow. Her mother watched with knowing eyes and started preparing a wedding dress before anyone had spoken of marriage. The whole village could see what was blooming between them, everyone except Marcus, who saw only theft of what he believed was rightfully his. The day Tobias formally asked permission to court her, the autumn leaves were burning gold and red on the mountainside. He brought her father 6 beaver pelts, a fortune, and a necklace of river pearls for her mother. But more importantly, he brought respect and patience, waiting for Aiyana's answer instead of assuming it. When she said yes, her voice barely a whisper, his face lit up like dawn breaking over the mountain. They were married 2 weeks later, as the first snow began to fall. The celebration lasted 3 days, with dancing and feasting, and elders telling stories of love that lasted beyond death. Marcus didn't attend, but everyone saw him watching from the tree line, his face dark with rage. Aiyana's aunt whispered that they should be careful, that rejected love could turn poisonous, but Aiyana was too happy to listen. She had found her match, her equal, her heart's home. What could one bitter man do against such joy? Their tent stood on a small plateau halfway up Bramley's mountain, where the morning sun touched the earth first, and the evening stars seemed close enough to pluck. Tobias had chosen the spot carefully, near enough to water, far enough from predators, perfect for watching storms roll across the valley. They built it together over 3 days, Aiyana holding the poles steady, while Tobias stretched the elk hide tight, both of them laughing when the wind tried to steal their work. Inside they laid bear furs that Tobias had been saving for years, soft and warm against the frozen ground. Aiyana hung dried flowers from the ceiling poles, lavender for peace, sage for wisdom, wild roses for love. It wasn't much by any measure, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Every morning Tobias would wake before dawn to check his trap lines, while Aiyana tended the fire and prepared breakfast from whatever they had, usually dried meat, berries, and flatbread cooked on hot stones. They worked in comfortable rhythm, 2 parts of one whole. He was better at hunting and building. She was better at finding edible plants and predicting weather. Together, they were surviving winter better than many couples who'd been married for years. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and plan their future. Tobias wanted to build a proper cabin before their first child came. Aiyana wanted to plant a garden in the spring, grow corn and squash like her grandmother had taught her. They drew pictures in the dirt with sticks, mapping out where everything would go, their dreams taking shape in the flickering firelight. But Marcus was always there, just out of sight. Sometimes Aiyana would catch a glimpse of him between the trees when she went to fetch water. Other times, Tobias would find footprints around their tent that didn't belong to any animal. They tried to ignore it at first, hoping Marcus would tire of his obsession and move on. But as winter deepened, his presence grew bolder. He left dead rabbits at their entrance, not as gifts, but as threats, their necks twisted in unnatural angles. He scattered their firewood while they slept. Once, Aiyana found him inside their tent when she returned from gathering, sitting on their furs like he owned them. "You should have chosen me," he said, his voice flat and dangerous. She held her knife steady, though her hand shook. "Leave now, or I'll scream for Tobias." Marcus smiled, cold as winter moonlight. "He can't protect you forever." Then he left, but his words lingered like smoke. Tobias wanted to confront Marcus, to settle things like men, but Aiyana begged him not to. "He wants you angry," she said, holding Tobias's face in her hands. "He wants an excuse to hurt you. Please, my love, don't give him one." So Tobias swallowed his rage and tried to be watchful instead. He started carrying his bow everywhere, even to the stream. He built hidden caches of weapons around their camp. He taught Aiyana the whistle that meant danger, the one that meant run, the one that meant hide. They were living under siege in their own home, their happiness shadowed by constant fear. The other villagers noticed but didn't intervene. This was between the 3 of them, they said, though everyone knew it would end badly. Still, there were moments of pure joy that Marcus couldn't touch. The morning they saw a family of deer pass within arm's reach of their tent, so close they could see their breath in the cold air. The night they danced in the snow to no music but their own laughter. The afternoon, Aiyana told Tobias she might be carrying their child, and he spun her around until they both fell dizzy into a snowbank. These moments were their resistance, their refusal to let Marcus's poison kill what they had built. They held each other tighter, loved each other fiercer, as if they both sensed their time was running short. "Whatever happens," Tobias whispered one night, his arms wrapped around her as wind howled outside, "know that loving you has been worth everything." She pressed her face into his chest, memorizing his heartbeat, storing it up for the loneliness she couldn't yet imagine. The morning Tobias died started like any other, with frost on the tent walls and their breath-making clouds in the cold air. He kissed Aiyana's forehead as she pretended to still be asleep, their morning ritual that always made her smile. "I'm going to the lake," he whispered. "The ice is breaking up, and the fish will be hungry." She opened one eye and pulled him back down for a proper kiss. "Be careful," she said, the words automatic but heartfelt. They'd said them every morning since Marcus's threats had started. "Always am," Tobias replied, though they both knew careful wasn't always enough. He gathered his fishing spear and nets, wrapped dried meat and bread in cloth for lunch, and stepped out into the gray dawn. Aiyana watched from the tent flap as he walked down the mountain path, his silhouette growing smaller until the trees swallowed him. She didn't know she would never see him alive again. The morning passed slowly. Aiyana mended a tear in Tobias's winter shirt, then worked on the rabbit-skin blanket she was making for the baby she hoped she carried. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, and she stepped outside to gather kindling for the evening fire. That's when she heard it, a sound that made her blood freeze. It was distant, but unmistakable. The sound of men fighting on water, the splash of paddles used as weapons, the echo of voices raised in anger across the lake. She dropped the wood and ran, her feet finding the path by memory, branches tearing at her dress and hair. The trail to Lake Delaware had never seemed longer. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pushed through the pain in her side, driven by a terrible certainty that those sounds meant nothing good. She burst through the tree line just in time to see the end. 2 canoes in the middle of the lake, one overturned and empty. In the other, Marcus stood over Tobias's still form, a bloody knife in his hand. Their eyes met across the water, Marcus's triumphant, Aiyana's horrified. She screamed Tobias's name, but he didn't move. Marcus lifted Tobias's body with disturbing ease and pushed it over the side. The splash seemed to echo forever, ripples spreading outward like the shock waves of Aiyana's breaking heart. She fell to her knees at the water's edge, her scream turning to a wail that sent birds fleeing from the trees. Marcus began paddling toward shore, toward her, that satisfied smirk spreading across his scarred face. "Now you're free to make the right choice," he called across the water. But Aiyana was already moving, driven by an instinct older than thought. She ran back into the trees, but not toward home, toward the cave she and Tobias had found, the one with the twisting passages and the hidden exit. Let Marcus think she was running in panic. Let him think grief had made her stupid. As she ran, her mind worked with terrible clarity. She knew every root and rock on this mountain. She knew where the cave narrowed, where it opened, where loose rocks could be dislodged. Marcus was stronger, but she was smarter, and she had something he didn't. Nothing left to lose. Behind her she heard Marcus beach his canoe, heard his heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush. "Aiyana," he called, "don't make this harder than it needs to be. You belong with me now." She slowed just enough to let him keep her in sight, leading him like a hunter leads a bear to a trap. Her tears blurred her vision, but her feet knew the way. The cave mouth appeared ahead, dark and gaping like an open wound in the mountainside. She ducked inside, hearing Marcus's triumphant laugh echo behind her. "Stupid girl," he said, his voice bouncing off the stone walls. "You've trapped yourself." But Aiyana knew better. She felt along the wall for the passage Tobias had shown her, the one that looked like nothing but a shadow. Her fingers found the opening, and she squeezed through, the rock scraping her skin raw. Behind her, Marcus cursed and stumbled in the darkness, his bulk working against him in the narrow space. By the time he realized he'd lost her, she was already climbing toward daylight, toward revenge. Aiyana emerged from the hidden exit gasping, her lungs burning from exertion and her heart racing with more than fear. She could hear Marcus below, crashing through the cave like a wounded bear, calling her name with increasing anger. The sun was high now, casting sharp shadows across the rocky ground. She didn't have much time. Her hands moved without conscious thought, gathering the driest wood she could find. Pine branches, heavy with resin, bark stripped from dead trees, anything that would burn fast and hot. As she worked, she thought of Tobias teaching her to build fires in the rain, his patient hands guiding hers. "Fire is life," he'd said. Now it would be death, but not hers. The pile grew quickly at the cave entrance. Aiyana's movements were mechanical, driven by a fury that burned colder than winter ice. She thought of all the mornings she'd wake up alone now, all the children who would never know their father, all the dreams that had drowned with Tobias in that lake. Her tears had stopped. There would be time for grief later. Now there was only the work. She found the flint and steel in her pouch. Tobias had insisted she always carry them. The irony wasn't lost on her. The first spark caught immediately, the dry pine needles crackling to life. The flames spread faster than she expected, hungry and wild. She fed them larger branches, building the fire until it roared like a living thing. Marcus's voice changed when the smoke reached him. The anger turned to confusion, then to fear. "What are you doing?" he shouted from deep in the cave. "Aiyana, let me out!" She said nothing, just kept feeding the fire, pushing burning branches into the cave mouth with a long stick. The smoke poured inward, following the air currents she and Tobias had mapped during their explorations. She heard Marcus coughing, stumbling, trying to find another way out. But there was no other way, not from where he was. She had led him to the deepest chamber, the one they'd called the belly of the mountain. The smoke would fill it like water in a bowl. "Please!" Marcus's voice was different now, desperate. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." But they both knew he was lying. He had meant every moment of it. The large ledge above the cave entrance had always worried Tobias. "One good shake, and that would come down," he'd said. Now Aiyana saw it differently. She found a sturdy branch and wedged it under the ledge, using a rock as a fulcrum. Physics was physics, whether you called it that or not. She threw her weight against the branch, once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th try, she heard the crack, stone splitting from stone. The ledge shifted, tilted, then crashed down in front of the cave entrance with a sound like thunder. It didn't block the entrance completely, but it narrowed it to a gap barely wide enough for smoke to escape. Marcus was screaming now, wordless animal sounds that might have moved her to pity if she hadn't seen Tobias's body disappearing beneath dark water. She sat back on her heels, watching the smoke pour from the gap like the mountain's dying breath. Her grandmother had once told her that revenge was like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. But her grandmother had never lost everything to a man's jealous rage. Sometimes, Aiyana thought, poison was exactly what was needed. The screaming went on for longer than she expected. Marcus was strong. Even she had to admit that. But strength meant nothing when you couldn't breathe. Eventually the screams turned to whimpers, then to silence. Still she sat, watching, waiting, making sure. A rabbit hopped past, paused to look at her, then bounded away. Life went on, indifferent to human tragedy. When the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, and no sound had come from the cave for an hour, she finally stood. Aiyana's legs shook as she walked back toward the village. The sun was setting, painting the sky the color of blood and flame. She needed to tell someone what she had done, not for absolution, but for witness. Her feet carried her to her sister Naira's tent at the edge of the settlement. Naira was grinding corn when Aiyana appeared, and one look at her sister's face made her drop the grinding stone. "What happened?" Naira asked, though part of her already knew. Everyone had been waiting for the tension between Tobias and Marcus to explode. Aiyana collapsed into her sister's arms and finally let herself break. The words came out in gasps between sobs. Tobias murdered, Marcus burned, the cave sealed. Naira held her and said nothing, just let her sister empty herself of the horrible truth. When Aiyana had no more tears, Naira helped her sit and brought her water. "You did what you had to do," Naira said quietly. "Marcus would have forced you to be his wife, or killed you for refusing. Everyone knows what kind of man he was." But Aiyana shook her head. "I didn't do it because I had to. I did it because I wanted him to suffer. I wanted him to know what it felt like to be trapped, to be helpless, to watch death coming, and be unable to stop it." Her voice was flat, drained of emotion. "Does that make me a monster too?" Naira gripped her hands tightly. "It makes you human, and it makes you a woman who loved her husband enough to ensure his killer faced justice." The word justice sat strangely in Aiyana's mouth. Was that what this was? They sat in silence as darkness fell. Naira's husband returned from hunting, took one look at them, and quietly began preparing dinner without asking questions. The normal sounds of evening, children playing, dogs barking, families gathering for meals, felt surreal to Aiyana. How could the world continue as if nothing had changed? How could people laugh and talk when Tobias would never laugh again? She thought of their tent on the mountain, empty now except for memories. She thought of the fish Tobias had gone to catch, swimming free while he lay on the lake bottom. The rabbit-skin blanket she'd been making would never wrap their child. Everything had ended in a single morning, as quickly as winter frost kills summer flowers. "You can't go back to the mountain," Naira said, as if reading her thoughts. "Stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do." But Aiyana was already shaking her head. "I have one more thing to do," she said, standing despite her exhaustion. "I need to go to the lake." Naira grabbed her arm. "Aiyana, no. I know what you're thinking, and Tobias wouldn't want—" But Aiyana gently removed her sister's hand. "Tobias is dead. What he would want doesn't matter anymore." She hugged Naira tightly, breathing in the familiar smell of her sister's hair, sage and wood smoke and home. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for not judging me. Take care of mother and father. Tell them I loved them." Before Naira could stop her, Aiyana was gone, walking into the darkness with the purposeful stride of someone who has already made their decision. Behind her she heard Naira calling, but she didn't turn back. The path to Lake Delaware was burned into her memory now. She could walk it blind. As she walked, she sang softly, an old song her grandmother had taught her about souls finding each other after death. The words came easily, as if they'd been waiting all her life to be sung. The moon rose full and bright, turning the path silver, lighting her way to her ending. Or perhaps, she thought, to her beginning. Either way, she would be with Tobias soon. Lake Delaware stretched before her like a mirror of black glass, reflecting the moon and stars so perfectly it seemed she could step from earth to sky. The water was calm, without even a whisper of wind to disturb its surface. Aiyana stood at the same spot where she had watched Marcus dump Tobias's body, her bare feet sinking slightly into the muddy shore. The cold didn't bother her anymore. Nothing bothered her anymore except the endless ache where her heart used to be. She thought she could see Tobias down there in the depths, waiting for her with that gentle smile, his arms open to receive her. The water would be cold, but his embrace would be warm. Death seemed like such a small price to pay for that reunion. She began to sing her death song, the one every member of her tribe learned but hoped never to use. It started low, almost a whisper, telling the spirits of her name, her lineage, her loves and losses. Her voice grew stronger as she sang of Tobias, their first meeting, their wedding, their dreams that would never bloom. She sang of Marcus, too, the shadow that had followed their joy, the poison that had killed their future. She sang of the fire in the cave, the justice she had taken with her own hands, the blood that now stained her soul. The song echoed across the water, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled in harmony. The mountains themselves seemed to lean in to listen, these ancient stones that had seen so many tragedies, so many loves ended too soon. As she sang, she walked forward into the water. The cold shot through her legs like lightning, but she didn't stop. Knee-deep, waist-deep, chest-deep, the water was patient, welcoming, ready to reunite what man had separated. Her dress floated around her like wings, and for a moment she felt like she could fly down to wherever Tobias waited, fly away from this world of pain and loss and endless wondering what could have been. The moon laid a silver path across the water, and she followed it like a bride walking to her groom. Behind her, on the shore, she heard voices. Naira and others from the village had followed her, but they were too far away, and she was too close to peace. "Tobias," she whispered, the last word before the water claimed her. She let herself sink, didn't fight, didn't struggle. The cold was shocking at first, then numbing, then almost warm. She opened her eyes underwater and saw the moon wavering above like a door to another world. Her lungs burned for air, but she ignored them. This was the path she had chosen the moment she saw Marcus's satisfied smile. Down here, in the dark and quiet, she could almost feel Tobias's presence. Her vision began to darken at the edges, and she welcomed it. Soon, so soon, this pain would end. But then, against her will, her body's survival instinct kicked in. Her legs kicked, pushing her upward, and she broke the surface, gasping. "No!" She screamed at the sky, at her traitorous body that wouldn't let her die. She tried to sink again, but her sister's husband, Samuel, was already in the water, his strong arms wrapping around her, dragging her back to shore despite her struggles. "Let me go," she sobbed. "Please, just let me go to him." But Samuel held tight, and soon others were there, pulling her onto the muddy bank, wrapping her in blankets, carrying her away from the lake that had refused to take her. As they carried her back to the village, Aiyana looked over Samuel's shoulder at the water one last time. In the moonlight, she could swear she saw Tobias standing on the surface, shaking his head, pointing back toward the mountain, toward life. Then he was gone, and there was only water and moonlight and the terrible weight of continuing to breathe. 3 months passed before Aiyana returned to Bramley's mountain. The village elders had forbidden her from being alone, taking turns watching her, making sure she ate, making sure she didn't try to follow Tobias again. Slowly, against her will at first, she began to heal. Not the sharp, clean healing of a cut, but the deep, aching healing of a broken bone. Slow, painful, but eventually strong. The cave where Marcus died had been sealed properly by the men of the village, stones piled high to ensure no one would ever enter that tomb again. But Aiyana didn't go there. She went to the tent she had shared with Tobias, still standing despite the winter storms, waiting for her like a patient friend. Everything was as they'd left it that last morning. Tobias's shirt still hung from the pole where he'd placed it. The rabbit-skin blanket lay folded where she'd set it down. Their life interrupted, frozen in time like insects in amber. Aiyana sat on their furs and finally let herself remember the good moments without the poison of how it ended. She remembered Tobias trying to sing and sounding like a wounded elk, both of them laughing until they cried. She remembered the morning he'd brought her the first spring flowers, shy as a boy with his first crush. She remembered his hands, gentle but strong, and how safe she'd felt in his arms. The memories hurt, but it was a clean hurt now, not the infected wound it had been. As spring arrived, Aiyana made a decision. She wouldn't leave the mountain, but she wouldn't die on it either. She would live, not for herself, not even for Tobias's memory, but for the child growing inside her, the one the village healer had confirmed a week ago. Tobias's child, their miracle, the future they'd planted without knowing it, would bloom without him. She began to rebuild, not just the tent, but her entire life. The women of the village helped her construct a proper shelter, bringing tools and wisdom. The men brought meat and firewood, making sure she never went without. Even children came, drawn by her gentle nature and the stories she told of brave warriors and clever women. By summer, her belly was round, and her heart, while still scarred, had found a new rhythm. She would tell this child about their father, not just his death, but his life. She would tell them about the man who was gentle with fox pelts and fierce in his love. She would tell them about the mountain mornings and starlit nights, about dreams drawn in dirt and promises whispered in darkness. And yes, eventually, she would tell them about Marcus too, and the terrible price of obsession, the destruction that comes from believing you own another person's heart. But mostly, she would tell them about love, real love, the kind that sacrifices, that builds, that creates instead of destroys. The day her son was born, the first snow of winter was falling. She named him Tobias, of course, and when she looked into his dark eyes, his father's eyes, she finally understood why the lake hadn't taken her. This child was Tobias's true legacy, not vengeance, but life, not ending, but beginning. As she held him to her breast, she sang the same lullaby her mother had sung to her, and her grandmother before that, a chain of women's voices stretching back through time. Outside, the snow covered the mountain in clean white, hiding the cave where violence had ended, blessing the ground where love would grow again. And somewhere, whether in the wind through the pines or the splash of water on stones, She could swear she heard Tobias laughing, free and joyful, knowing that their love had won in the end.